Here's something that will change the way you look at your garden forever. Before penicillin, before surgery suites, before pharmaceutical companies existed at all, hospitals had gardens, not flower gardens. Working, living medicine cabinets, growing right outside the patient wards. Doctors weren't using pills or injections. They were walking outside pulling leaves and pressing them directly onto infected wounds, broken bones, and feverish bodies. Some of those leaves worked well enough that modern scientists are still studying them today, and a few of them you're probably calling weeds right now. Today we're going back before 1928, when Fleming discovered penicillin, and looking at 12 leaves that ancient healers and hospital physicians used to keep people alive. Some of these stories are going to surprise you. Let's go. Leaf number 1, comfrey, the bone knitter. The first one on our list has one of the most fascinating scientific backstories of any plant in herbal history. Comfrey, Symphytum officinale. The name itself comes from a Greek word, symphytos, which literally means grown together. That's not a coincidence. Ancient healers observed that this plant seemed to speed up the way broken tissue came back together, and they started calling it knit bone. The Greek genus name Symphytum and the German name Banewell both directly refer to the wound and bone healing effect of this plant. For centuries, surgeons packed comfrey poultices around fractured limbs and watched swelling go down faster than they could explain. Now here's where it gets interesting. Modern research identified the compound responsible, a substance called allantoin, which is a potent cell proliferator. It stimulates the growth of healthy tissue, speeds wound healing, and reduces scar formation. Another compound, rosmarinic acid, provides powerful anti-inflammatory and antibacterial activity on top of that. Comfrey was even used during World War I for wound healing, so this wasn't just ancient folklore. Military medics were reaching for it on real battlefields. The caveat? Comfrey contains pyrrolizidine alkaloids that can damage the liver if consumed internally, so today only external preparations are recommended. The ancient healers were onto something real. They just didn't know what the plant could also do to them if they drank it by the cupful. Leaf number 2, plantain, the weed under your feet. Number 2 is one of the most underrated plants on this entire list, and there's a strong chance it's growing in your lawn right now. Broadleaf plantain, Plantago major, not the banana. The weed. Native Americans gave it the name white man's footprint because it spread rapidly wherever European settlers walked, appearing along every pathway and in every compacted soil they created. But here's what's remarkable. Those same Native Americans didn't just observe the plant, they started using it almost immediately. Its medicinal uses were documented as far back as Avicenna's 10th century canon of medicine, for conditions ranging from fevers and coughs to bleeding and wounds. The leaves are cooling, mildly astringent, and anti-inflammatory, and properties that made plantain leaves useful as a poultice for insect bites, stings, rashes, eczema, and infections. Herbalists even called it the green bandage. Modern analysis confirmed what centuries of use suggested. Plantain leaves contain allantoin for cell regeneration, tannins that stop bleeding and tighten tissues, mucilage that soothes irritated membranes, and iridoid glycosides with potent antimicrobial properties. A plant this well documented, growing as freely as a weed in almost every country on Earth, it's one of the most accessible medicines that ever existed. Leaf number 3, willow leaves, the overlooked half of aspirin's story. Everyone knows the story. Willow bark inspired aspirin. Scientists isolated salicylic acid from the bark, eventually turned it into acetyl salicylic acid, and modern pain relief was born. But here's what most people skip right over. Over 3,500 years ago, Sumerians were already using willow as a pain reliever and anti-inflammatory, and they weren't always using just the bark. Historical records describe willow leaves being brewed into teas and applied as compresses for fever and pain. The leaves carry related salicylate compounds and were a practical medicine for people who couldn't always strip bark efficiently. The reason this matters is simple. It tells us that, for millennia, across completely different civilizations, people independently landed on the same plant for pain and fever. That kind of cross-cultural agreement isn't coincidence. It's observation, it's evidence. Leaf number 4, olive leaf, the epidemic fighter. When plague came through a Mediterranean town in the 1800s, physicians turned to something that had been growing on hillsides for thousands of years: olive leaves. Medicinal use of olive leaf extract dates back to the early 1800s, when it was used in liquid form as a treatment for malarial infections. Mediterranean healers brewed infusions from the leaves during disease outbreaks, believing they purified the blood and drove out mysterious fevers. For a long time, scientists dismissed this as superstition. Then they found oleuropein. Modern research identified that the antimicrobial activity of olive leaf extract is largely attributed to polyphenols, primarily oleuropein and its derivatives. Lab studies showed olive leaf extracts exhibited significant antimicrobial activity against Salmonella, E. coli, Staphylococcus aureus, Listeria, and Pseudomonas aeruginosa. The people who burned olive branches and brewed the leaves during epidemics didn't know what bacteria were, but they were working with something that genuinely fought them. Leaf number 5, cabbage, the living bandage. This one throws people every time. Long before sterile dressings existed, doctors and battlefield medics applied fresh cabbage leaves directly to inflamed joints, ulcers, and infected wounds. Not because they had nothing better, because cabbage leaves stayed cool and retained moisture for hours, long enough to reduce swelling and keep damaged tissue from drying out. Some 19th century hospitals reportedly kept a supply of fresh cabbage specifically for dressings, not for the kitchen. This was real medical practice. The science backs it up. Cabbage leaves contain glucosinolates, vitamin C, and anti-inflammatory compounds. Studies in more recent decades have validated their use for conditions like mastitis, breast inflammation in nursing women, finding that chilled cabbage leaves reduced pain and swelling effectively. A plant most people only see in a salad bowl was once a standard hospital supply. Leaf number 6, mulberry leaf, the pre-insulin diabetes remedy. Here's one that almost seems impossible until you look at the research. Traditional physicians in Asia, centuries before insulin was discovered in 1921, observed that mulberry leaf preparations reduced excessive thirst and urination in patients showing signs of what we'd now recognize as diabetes. They had no blood glucose tests, no lab equipment, just observation over generations. Modern science found out why. Mulberry leaves contain a compound called 1-deoxynogeromycin, or DNJ, which inhibits an enzyme that breaks down complex carbohydrates in the digestive tract. Slower carbohydrate digestion means more gradual rises in blood sugar. Researchers are actively studying mulberry leaf extracts for blood sugar regulation right now. The ancient physicians who used it had no idea what a glucose molecule was, but they were watching the right thing happen. Leaf number 7, yarrow, the warrior's leaf. If one plant has the most dramatic origin story on this list, it might be yarrow. Its botanical name is Achillea millefolium. The genus name Achillea comes from Achilles, yes, that Achilles, from the ancient legend that he used yarrow to treat the bleeding wounds of his soldiers during the Trojan War. Whether or not you believe the mythology, the name has survived for over 2,000 years because it pointed to something real. Yarrow leaves, when crushed and pressed onto a fresh wound, act as a styptic, meaning they help stop bleeding. Ancient warriors reportedly carried yarrow leaves specifically for battlefield wounds, applying them directly to cuts to slow hemorrhage. The plant contains achillitin and other compounds that promote clotting. It's also antimicrobial, which made it doubly useful on open wounds in pre-hygienic conditions. This was not folk magic. This was functional wound management. Leaf number 8, guava leaf, the cholera emergency. In parts of Asia and Latin America where doctors were scarce and cholera outbreaks could decimate a village, families turned to something that grew in the yard. Guava leaves, boiled into a strong tea, were used for severe diarrhea. The practice spread widely enough that it persisted through generations, not because people had no other options, but because it seemed to work. When researchers examined guava leaf extracts in the lab, they found genuinely compelling activity. The leaves contain tannins, flavonoids, and essential oils that have demonstrated antibacterial activity against several pathogens involved in gastrointestinal disease. Some studies found inhibition of Staphylococcus aureus and E. coli specifically. This is the pattern you see over and over. An ancient emergency remedy, used because it was available and seemed to help, that holds up when modern science eventually gets around to looking at it. Leaf number 9, nettle leaf, the deliberate sting. This one might be the most counterintuitive entry on the entire list, because the treatment itself sounds like harm. Ancient physicians and rural practitioners deliberately struck painful, arthritic joints with fresh, stinging nettle leaves, on purpose, intentionally causing the burning, stinging sensation the plant is famous for. The practice has a name, urtication, and it survived well into the 20th century. The reasoning was that the controlled cold sting improved blood circulation in the area and created a counter-irritation that temporarily overrode the deeper chronic pain. Here's what's strange. There may have been something to it. Nettle leaves release histamine, serotonin, and formic acid on contact, compounds that trigger local inflammation and blood flow. Some modern studies on patients with thumb arthritis found that topical nettle application reduced pain and disability. The mechanism is still debated, but when the same treatment persists across multiple continents over multiple centuries, it usually means something real is happening. Leaf number 10, ivy leaf, the cough remedy still in pharmacies. This entry is unique on our list because it never actually stopped being medicine. Ancient Greek physicians used ivy leaf extracts for respiratory illnesses, despite the plant being toxic in large amounts, which tells you how seriously they took it. They weren't careless. They were specific about preparation and dosage. Jump to the present day. Ivy leaf extract is a principal ingredient in cough syrups sold in several countries today, produced from carefully standardized preparations that control for active compounds. The active saponins in ivy leaves relax bronchial muscles and help break up mucus in airways. This is one of the clearest cases of a historical medicine being validated, industrialized, and put back on pharmacy shelves. The ancient healers were right. It just took 2,000 years to standardize the dose. Leaf number 11, birch leaf, the kidney flush. In European herbal texts stretching back centuries, birch leaf tea was consistently prescribed for one specific purpose: increasing urination and reducing swelling. Practitioners believed that flushing the body could prevent infections from worsening, particularly in cases involving the kidneys and urinary tract. They didn't understand bacterial infection the way we do now, but their instinct, increase fluid throughput through the kidneys, turns out to have merit. Birch leaves contain flavonoids and terpene compounds that modern research has confirmed have genuine diuretic effects. Several European herbal pharmacopoeias still list birch leaf as an approved herbal medicine for urinary tract inflammation and kidney stones, used as a supportive treatment to increase urinary flow. Ancient European healers were essentially prescribing the same supportive therapy that modern doctors recommend, alongside antibiotics for UTIs. Drink more, flush the system. Leaf number 12, tea leaves, the pantry as pharmacy. The last one on our list is so ordinary that most people will genuinely be surprised. Regular tea leaves, Camellia sinensis, the same plant behind your morning cup, were once applied directly to wounds as a dressing. Before sterile gauze was widely available, cooled, used tea leaves or strong tea compresses were placed over cuts and minor wounds. The reason is chemistry. Tea leaves are extraordinarily rich in tannins, astringent compounds that constrict blood vessels, tighten tissue, and help reduce minor bleeding. The tannin content of tea also gives it genuine antibacterial properties. Multiple studies have confirmed antimicrobial activity in tea extracts against a range of bacterial strains. So the next time someone tells you herbal medicine is primitive, remember that the same leaf that goes into a 50-cent tea bag was once the most accessible wound dressing that existed, and the chemistry behind why it worked is still being studied today. Here's the thing about all 12 of these leaves. The biggest misconception people carry is that ancient plant medicine was just desperate guessing, that because healers didn't understand cells or bacteria, their treatments were worthless. That's not what the evidence shows. According to the WHO, 170 member states have reported on the use of traditional medicine by their populations, and the scientific investigation of those traditions keeps turning up compounds that are real, active, and sometimes still unmatched. What those ancient healers lacked wasn't observation. They were extraordinary observers. What they lacked was standardized dosing, purity controls, and clinical testing, which is why the same plant that helped one patient could harm another. That gap is what modern science fills. But the plants, the leaves, many of them were right all along. If you're growing any of these in your garden, or you want to start, drop a comment below and let me know which ones. And if you found this useful, share it with someone who thinks all their answers come from a pill bottle. See you in the next one.